Ethan Caldwell was 44 years old when his wife's invoice for an emergency deposition listed a case number that had been closed for 7 months, billed through their household account, and quietly tied to the man she had been seeing after hours. For 14 years, he had been the courthouse facilities supervisor, the man who treated every leaking pipe, stuck elevator, and darkened hearing room like a record that had to be preserved before anyone. Important notice, it was broken. Every weekday, he left their small brick house in Maple Ridge at 5:18 a.m., packed Nicole's coffee in the travel mug with the silver lid she liked, and checked the courthouse boilers before most attorneys had unlocked their cars. He found the invoice on a Saturday morning in the second drawer of their kitchen desk, wedged beneath warranty papers for a dishwasher he had fixed twice instead of replacing. What Ethan found in that exact drawer made his fingers lock around the paper before his eyes moved to the bottom line. There was a closed civil case number, a $642 rush transcript charge, and a parking validation for the old federal garage 2 blocks from Bryce Landon's consulting office. By Monday, Nicole had used the language of sealed legal work to make Ethan feel small for asking why a closed case needed an emergency deposition. By Thursday, she had signed a vendor conflict disclosure that made it look like Ethan knew more about her firm's county renewal than he actually did. Then, in a recorded vendor meeting she never expected him to hear, Nicole said, "He's a courthouse maintenance man with a hobby app. He wouldn't know leverage if it was filed in Triplicate." She had no idea that the hobby app was Caldwell Index, the transcript-search patent her firm depended on, and that Ethan's ownership of it would let him reclaim the money, the record, and the dignity she had already spent. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you're watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. Before Nicole Caldwell became the kind of woman who could lie without raising her voice, she had been the person Ethan trusted most in quiet rooms. She was a certified court reporter with a reputation for catching every word, every hesitation, and every correction attorneys tried to slide past the record. Ethan used to say Nicole listened like a locked archive, not because she was cold, but because nothing important disappeared when she was paying attention. That was what made him fall in love with her. Not her smile, though. He remembered that too. Not the dark suits she wore to depositions or the careful way she labeled every file on their home computer. It was the night after his mother's funeral, when everyone else tried to fill the room with comfort and Nicole sat beside him at the kitchen table for almost 2 hours without forcing him to speak. Ethan had spent his whole adult life repairing systems other people only noticed when they failed, and Nicole seemed to be the first person who understood that a quiet man was not an empty one. Their marriage settled into practical rituals. Ethan handled the house, the cars, the furnace filter, the property taxes, and every small repair Nicole promised she would get around to scheduling. Nicole handled the calendars, the professional contacts, the dinner reservations when they could afford them, and the polished explanations that made their life sound steadier than it often felt. They were not wealthy, but they were not careless, and for a long time Ethan believed the marriage worked, because both of them knew where the load-bearing walls were. The cracks were not dramatic at first. Nicole began taking more evening assignments, especially ones she described as sealed depositions or expedited transcript work. She would come home with her hair still neat and her voice still measured, saying there were confidentiality rules Ethan would not understand unless he worked inside the reporting side of the courthouse. Ethan did not argue, because he knew enough about legal procedure to know that some doors were supposed to stay closed. Still, he noticed things. He noticed because his job had trained him to notice what most people stepped around. A flickering light above courtroom 3B told him whether the wiring had moisture behind it. A jammed elevator button told him which floor had been abused by rolling carts all week. A courtroom that smelled faintly of copier toner at 6 a.m. told him someone had been working late where no one had signed a facilities request. Nicole's changes arrived the same way, small enough to explain and consistent enough to remember. She started keeping her work bag beside the laundry room door instead of in the bedroom closet. She began paying for ride shares from the joint account even though she had a monthly parking pass. She stopped asking Ethan about his courthouse maintenance calls, not all at once, but with the slow efficiency of someone muting a background noise. The first detail he could not place came on a Wednesday night in March. Nicole told him she had an emergency deposition connected to a sealed matter and would probably be home after 10. At 9:40, Ethan was in the kitchen rinsing the coffee mug she had left behind when their shared banking app sent a charge alert from Courtline Reporting Services. The amount was ordinary. The timing was not. The case number in the memo line was Franklin v. Aster Medical Supply, a case Ethan remembered because courtroom 4D had been closed for water damage during the final hearing. He had signed the maintenance closure ticket himself. That case had ended 7 months earlier, and a closed courtroom did not need an emergency deposition. Ethan stared at the memo line until the sink overflowed into the drain board. Then he shut off the faucet and told himself there had to be a filing correction somewhere he could not see yet. Ethan did not ask Nicole about the case number that night. That was not because he trusted the explanation he had already started building for her, but because the part of him trained by old buildings knew better than to swing a hammer at the first stain on. The ceiling, a leak had to be traced backward. Water rarely entered where it appeared. Nicole came home at 10:26 with her coat folded over one arm and her court reporter bag pressed against her hip. She kissed the side of his face, thanked him for keeping dinner warm, and mentioned that the attorneys had been a nightmare with corrections. Her voice had the same controlled exhaustion she used. When a deposition ran long, the kind that made questions feel almost rude before they were even asked, Ethan watched her move through the kitchen. She opened the refrigerator, reached for the glass container of chicken and rice, and asked whether the courthouse had finally fixed the west stairwell cameras. It was an ordinary question. That was what bothered him most, because Nicole had always known how to place one ordinary sentence over another, the way a transcript correction could hide a rough answer without deleting it. Completely, he almost brought up Franklin v. Aster Medical Supply while she stood at the microwave. Instead, he wiped the counter and said the stairwell cameras were still cycling errors. Nicole nodded as if she had heard him, but her eyes moved to her phone when it lit against the table. She turned it over without checking the screen, smooth enough that another husband might have missed it. Over the next week, Ethan tried to repair the doubt the same way he repaired old wiring. Isolate one problem, test it, and see if it held. He told himself case numbers were reused in internal billing. He told himself court line might have attached the wrong memo line to the charge. He told himself Nicole had spent years being precise for a living and would not risk her name over something sloppy enough to appear in a household banking alert. Nicole made it easy for him to doubt himself. She did not come home smelling of cologne or hiding lipstick on collars, and she did not suddenly become careless with money. She still ordered his allergy medication before he ran out. She still left the porch light on when he had late boiler inspections. She still remembered that he hated cilantro and removed it from takeout before handing him the container. That was why suspicion felt embarrassing. Ethan could stand in a flooded file room at 3 a.m. and make decisions quickly, but in his own kitchen, he found himself hesitating over a bank alert like a man who had forgotten the difference between a warning light and a loose wire. Nicole had spent years teaching him that her work required confidentiality, and now every question sounded like an accusation before it left his mouth. On Friday, she told him she had another sealed deposition. This time, the location was not the courthouse, but a private conference suite downtown, because the attorneys wanted neutral ground. Ethan nodded because neutral ground was a phrase he had heard in legal circles. It had the kind of professional weight that stopped ordinary spouses from pressing too hard. He gave her the benefit of the doubt in action, not just in thought. He packed her dinner in a paper bag because she said she would not have time to eat. He checked the weather and told her the side streets near the federal garage would flood if the storm came in early. He even moved his own truck so she could leave the driveway without backing around the trash bins. At 8:13 that night, the household ride account charged $38.60 for a luxury car pickup near the courthouse annex. Nicole had driven herself downtown. Ethan knew she had, because he had watched her taillights turn left at the end of Maple Ridge Lane. The ride receipt listed the destination as Wexler Tower, an office building that did not house courtrooms, deposition suites, or any reporting agency Ethan recognized. He sat at the kitchen table with the receipt open on his laptop. The house made its usual settling noises around him, furnace clicking, refrigerator humming, rain tapping the storm window over the sink. Ethan had listened to buildings long enough to know when a sound belonged and when it did not. This one did not. Nicole came home just after 11, carrying the untouched paper bag he had packed for her. She said the attorneys ordered food. She said the deposition went off schedule. She said the witness was difficult, and then she paused just long enough to ask why Ethan looked tired. He asked carefully why she needed a rideshare if she had driven downtown. Nicole did not flinch. She set the paper bag on the counter, slid out of her coat, and said parking near the private suite had been impossible after the storm warnings. When Ethan mentioned the pickup location near the courthouse annex and the destination at Wexler Tower, her expression changed only at the edges. "Why were you checking that closely?" she asked. It was not a confession. It was not even anger. It was a shift in jurisdiction, a clean move from the facts to his right to ask about them. Ethan felt the question land where she intended it to land, in the part of him that already worried he was being unfair. He said it came through the shared account. Nicole folded her coat over the chair and told him sealed matters involved people he did not know, schedules he could not verify, and obligations she could not explain just to make him comfortable. Then she softened her voice, the same voice that had once sat with him after his mother's funeral, and said she needed him to respect the one part of her work that was not his to maintain. For 2 days, Ethan tried to believe that. He replaced a cracked tile in the upstairs bathroom. He fixed the loose hinge on Nicole's closet door. He did every small task that made their house feel steady because repair was easier than suspicion. Then the second detail arrived in the mail on Monday afternoon. It was a quarterly parking reconciliation notice for their family pass, the kind Ethan barely read because it usually matched routine courthouse use. This time, 3 entries showed Nicole's pass entering the old federal garage on nights she claimed to be at private sealed depositions across town, and each exit time matched a luxury ride charge. Leaving Wexler Tower within 12 minutes, Ethan laid the notice beside the invoice from the kitchen drawer. 1 document could be a mistake. 2 could be coincidence. 3 entries, 2 locations, and the same impossible timing began to look less like a loose wire and more like a circuit someone had built on purpose. On Tuesday morning, Ethan arrived at the courthouse before sunrise and did what he always did when something in the building stopped making sense. He started with the records that belonged to the system, not the rumors that belonged to people. The old courthouse had taught him that panic made bad diagnostics, and Ethan was not ready to accuse his wife of anything he could not trace through a document. He began with the public docket terminals in the records lobby after checking a backed-up floor drain near probate court. Franklin v. Aster Medical Supply was easy to find because the case number had stayed in his memory, like a label on a broken breaker panel. The docket showed final disposition 7 months earlier. No reopened hearings, no emergency deposition notice, and no sealed activity entry during the week. Nicole claimed the assignment had pulled. Her downtown, that did not prove an affair. Ethan repeated that to himself while the printer warmed beside him. It proved the invoice memo was wrong, or Nicole's explanation was incomplete, or Courtline reporting had attached an old case number to a new billing item. A careful man did not turn a flicker into a fire report just because he smelled smoke. Still, the page came out of the printer with a kind of weight he did not like. Ethan folded it once and slipped it inside the maintenance clipboard he carried through the building. Then he spent the next 6 hours replacing ceiling tiles, resetting a security panel, and answering 3 calls from judges' clerks who needed heat adjusted in rooms where no one agreed on what comfortable meant. All day, the paper stayed under his work orders like a second job he had not clocked in for. At lunch, he checked the household email account connected to their shared payment card. He did not open Nicole's private messages or look for anything that was not his. He searched the statements sent to both of them, the same monthly summaries he used when reconciling home expenses. Courtline had billed them 4 times in 9 weeks, always with vague language, always after 7 p.m., and always within hours of Nicole claiming sealed or expedited work. One charge included an attached PDF receipt. Ethan downloaded it because the account holder name listed both spouses, and the payment card ended in the same 4 digits as the card he used for groceries and furnace parts. The receipt did not say affair. It said rush transcript consultation, after hours appearance support, and professional coordination fee. But the billing contact listed Bryce Landon Consulting, and Ethan knew that name from county procurement flyers posted near the administrative wing. Bryce was not a lawyer. He was the kind of litigation consultant who attended vendor meetings, advised firms on contracts, and knew enough legal language to sound official without signing pleadings himself. Ethan had seen men like him in courthouse hallways for years, expensive coats, careful smiles, one hand always ready for the next introduction. They knew where the elevators were, but they never knew who kept them running. Ethan printed the receipt and put it beside the docket page. The first document said the case Nicole named was closed. The second said the payment tied to that case had gone through a consultant who should not have needed a court reporter for a dead file. The pieces still did not lock together, but they were starting to sit too close on the same table. That evening, Nicole was almost kind. She brought home Thai food without asking, set Ethan's favorite container near his plate, and told him she knew the last few weeks had been stressful. She said he had been quiet lately, and there was a softness in the way she said it that made him feel ashamed of the folder hidden beneath the seat of his truck. For a few minutes, Ethan nearly stopped. He watched Nicole sort through the takeout, separating the cilantro from his noodles without thinking, and he remembered the woman who used to hear what he meant before he figured out how to say it. He wondered whether he was building a case against the wrong person because age, routine, and his own underpaid life had left him easier to embarrass than he wanted to admit. Then Nicole's phone lit on the counter with a calendar reminder visible from where Ethan sat. It did not show a message. It showed a location. Wexler Tower, 8:30 p.m. Vendor prep. Nicole turned the phone face down and reached for the soy sauce. The next morning, Ethan checked what any citizen could check. County procurement schedules were public, and the contractor renewal calendar listed court line reporting services for review in 3 weeks. Under related consultants, one name appeared in the posted packet, Bryce Landon. Under technology dependencies, another name appeared in smaller print, Caldwell Index. Ethan read that line 3 times. The software was listed like a vendor feature, not a family history. It sat there in black type, buried inside a county packet Nicole had never mentioned attached to the firm that had been billing their household account after dark. Ethan did not feel strategic yet. He felt tired, exposed, and angry in a way he could not safely use. He closed the packet, logged out of the public terminal, and stood for a moment in the empty records lobby while the fluorescent lights hummed above him. In his work, a system failure was rarely one broken part. It was pressure, neglect, bad routing, and someone ignoring a warning until the damage reached a room people cared about. Ethan was beginning to understand that his marriage had been failing the same way. The name Caldwell Index sat in the county packet like a label Ethan had not expected to see in a room that belonged to Nicole's world. For almost a minute, he did not move from the public terminal, because the software was not just a product line to him. It was a piece of his mother's voice converted into code, licensing language, and quiet monthly royalty deposits Nicole had always dismissed as that little courthouse thing. Ruth Caldwell had been a clerk for 31 years, the kind of woman who could find a missing filing faster than most attorneys could explain why they needed it. When Ethan was in his 20s, she had kept a notebook full of complaints from tenants, defendants, and frightened spouses who could not afford transcripts after hearings that decided their lives. Ruth used to say a record that poor people could not reach was not really a record, just another locked door with nicer paper. Ethan had built the first version of Caldwell Index on an old desktop in her dining room. He was not a software founder in the way Nicole's professional circle used that phrase. He was a courthouse repairman with enough technical patience to solve a problem his mother kept bringing home. And over time, a regional court reporting vendor had licensed the tool because it made transcript-search faster, cleaner, and cheaper. Nicole knew about it in the same way people knew about things they had chosen not to value. She knew there were deposits. She knew Ethan filed paperwork every year. She knew his mother's name appeared on a memorial account connected to it. What she never seemed to understand was that the tool carried licensing rights, renewal leverage, and a current valuation Julia Stern would later estimate at roughly $1.8 million when future contracts and back royalties were included. That afternoon, Ethan went home early for the first time in months. He opened the gray fireproof box in the closet where he kept Ruth's death certificate, old tax forms, patent correspondence, and the original licensing agreement for Caldwell Index. The document smelled faintly of dust and paper, and as Ethan laid them across the bed, he could hear his mother's practical voice in his memory, not comforting him, not praising him, simply reminding him to keep copies because people respected records when they did not respect people. Nicole came home while the papers were still out. Ethan had only seconds to close the folder and slide it beneath a stack of courthouse maintenance manuals on the nightstand. She appeared in the bedroom doorway with a dry cleaning bag over one arm and asked whether he wanted salmon or pasta for dinner, as if the house still belonged to the old routine and not to a quiet audit he had started without her permission. He almost confronted her then. The words reached his throat when she set the dry cleaning on the chair and mentioned that Courtline's renewal hearing would make her week difficult. Ethan looked at the woman who had once sat beside his grief without rushing it, and for one dangerous second he wanted to ask if any part of that woman was still in the room. Instead, he said pasta was fine. It was the hardest repair he had ever made, not because it fixed anything, but because it kept the wall closed until he knew where the wires ran. Nicole smiled, touched his shoulder as she passed, and told him she appreciated him being easy during a stressful stretch. The next morning, Ethan called Malcolm Pierce from a bench outside the courthouse employee entrance. Malcolm was not flashy, but he understood contracts, procurement disputes, and divorce filings well enough to hear the danger in Ethan's pauses. He did not ask Ethan to accuse Nicole, and he did not promise a clean victory. He told Ethan to gather only what belonged to him, preserve dates, avoid private accounts, and stop paying any invoice he did not understand. Julia Stern came in 2 days later after Malcolm reviewed the first folder. She was a forensic accountant with a calm face and a habit of numbering every document in pencil before she read it. Ethan did not hand her rumors. He handed her household statements, public docket printouts, parking reconciliation notices, the court line receipt tied to Bryce Landon Consulting, and the Caldwell Index licensing documents. Julia found what Ethan had suspected, but could not name cleanly. Courtline's renewal packet depended on Caldwell Index performance metrics. Bryce's consulting proposal included language about seamless software continuity, and Nicole had signed an internal vendor. Disclosure saying her spouse had no active interest affecting procurement review. That sentence was not just insulting. It was useful because it proved Nicole had made Ethan smaller on paper before she tried to make him smaller in the marriage. For the next 9 days, Ethan became quiet in a way Nicole misread. She thought she had managed him back into his familiar place, the steady husband who fixed loose handles, paid bills, and accepted confidentiality as a locked courtroom. She did not see Malcolm preparing a conflict notice, Julia tracing the billing pattern, or Ethan writing a timeline so precise it looked less like heartbreak and more like a maintenance log for it. Building someone had been damaging after hours. By the end of the second week, Nicole had moved from secrecy into confidence. She filed a preliminary separation petition claiming Ethan's limited professional earning capacity made certain marital assets irrelevant to support discussions. She also confirmed she would attend the county contractor renewal hearing as Courtline's reporting representative, with Bryce Landon listed as an outside consultant. Ethan read the filing twice at the kitchen table after she went to bed. Then he placed it beside the invoice, the docket printout, the parking notice, the ride receipts, and the licensing agreement with Ruth Caldwell's signature on the earliest assignment page. For the first time, the record was no longer just proving what Nicole had done. It was ready to answer her in the only room where she still believed procedure belonged to her. The county contractor renewal hearing took place in a public meeting room on the second floor of the administration building, a space designed to make conflict look orderly. There were flags in the corners, microphones at the long table, folding chairs for observers, and a camera mounted high on the back wall for the county archive stream. Courtline Reporting Services had brought 3 executives, 2 attorneys, Nicole in a navy suit with her court reporter bag beside her chair, and Bryce Landon sitting 1 row behind her with a leather portfolio balanced on his knee. Ethan sat near the aisle with Malcolm Pierce on one side and Julia Stern on the other. He wore the charcoal jacket Nicole had bought him 2 Christmases earlier, back when she still liked dressing him for events she believed were above his normal rooms. He did not look angry, and that seemed to bother Nicole more than anger would have. She glanced at him once, then looked away quickly as if his calm did not fit the version of the hearing she had prepared for. The renewal began with ordinary language. Courtline's lead attorney talked about efficiency, accuracy, public trust, and continuity of service. Bryce spoke after him, describing technology integration and vendor reliability in a voice smooth enough to make risk sound like progress. Nicole sat composed through it all, taking notes by habit, her face arranged into the professional neutrality Ethan had once admired. Then Malcolm stood when public objections were opened. He did not accuse anyone of adultery. He did not use Nicole's name at first. He began with procurement conflict, software dependency, and a disclosure filed under penalty of administrative review. The room stayed polite because those words sounded procedural, and Nicole seemed to relax into that procedure as if it were familiar terrain. Malcolm placed the first document on the projector. It was the contractor renewal packet listing Caldwell Index as a core transcript-search dependency. Then he placed the second document beside it, the licensing agreement showing Ethan Caldwell as the rights holder. A few people in the room shifted in their chairs, not dramatically, but enough for Ethan to hear the metal legs scrape against the floor. Nicole leaned toward Courtline's attorney and whispered something too low for the microphone. Bryce stopped tapping his pen. Ethan watched the hearing panel read the documents, and he felt the strange discipline of letting paper do what anger could not. Malcolm moved to the disclosure Nicole had signed. Her statement appeared on the screen, the sentence Julia had circled in pencil. Spouse has no active interest affecting procurement review. Malcolm did not raise his voice. He simply said the county was being asked to renew a vendor contract built on technology controlled by the spouse of the reporting representative, who had declared that spouse irrelevant to the review. That is not the context of the disclosure, Nicole said. The panel chair looked toward her. You will have a chance to respond. Nicole nodded, but the correction had already done damage. She had sounded less like a witness and more like someone trying to move a leak back behind the wall after everyone had seen the water. Malcolm then introduced the household billing records. Not private messages, not stolen files, shared account charges, public dockets, parking pass reconciliations, and vendor receipts sent to a card Ethan had legal access to review. He showed the closed Franklin case, the after-hours court line invoice, the luxury ride charges connected to Wexler Tower, and the county docket proving no emergency deposition existed on the dates. Nicole had named, court line's attorney objected to the relevance of marital billing. Malcolm answered that the billing mattered because Bryce Landon Consulting appeared on receipts tied to court line coordination fees, while Bryce was also advising the vendor on renewal continuity. Bryce leaned back and crossed his arms, but his face had lost the confident softness he brought into the room. Then Malcolm played the recorded vendor meeting clip. It had been preserved in Courtline's own renewal materials because the meeting was part of a vendor presentation archive. Nicole's voice came through the speakers clean, casual, almost bored. He's a courthouse maintenance man with a hobby app. He wouldn't know leverage if it was filed in Triplicate, no one gasped. That was not how rooms like that worked. Instead, the silence narrowed. People looked from the screen to Ethan, then to Nicole, and the sentence changed shape while it hung there. It stopped sounding like a private complaint from a frustrated wife, and started sounding like the reason she had filed a false disclosure. Nicole's face did not collapse. She tried to recover the only way she knew how. That comment was taken from a longer discussion about technical management, not personal capacity. Ethan did not answer. He kept his hands folded in front of him, the same hands that had opened flooded courtrooms, reset dead audio systems, and patched roof leaks over records no one could afford to lose. He had spent his life maintaining rooms where other people got to speak. For once, he let the room listen without him. The panel chair asked whether anyone from the public wished to speak before the matter was continued. That was when Maribel Shaw stood from the third row. She was a legal aid attorney Ethan recognized from eviction court, always carrying more files than her arms seemed built for. Her voice was careful at first, but it grew steadier when she asked permission to address the payment history tied to transcript access. Maribel explained that for years, legal aid clients had received paid transcript copies from an account labeled the Ruth Caldwell Memorial Access account. Eviction defendants use those transcripts to challenge unlawful lockouts. Domestic violence survivors use them to correct custody and protective order records. She said her office had never known who funded it until the licensing documents on the screen connected Ruth Caldwell's name to Ethan. Nicole looked at Ethan, then really looked at him, and the composure she had used as shelter began to harden into something brittle. The insult had not only misjudged his leverage, it had misjudged his life. In front of the county panel, her own firm, Bryce, and the attorneys she had spent years impressing. The man she described as maintenance had been maintaining access to justice for people she never noticed. The first consequence came before anyone left the room. The panel chair suspended Courtline's renewal vote pending conflict review and ordered supplemental disclosures from every representative connected to the vendor packet. Bryce closed his portfolio without looking at Nicole. Ethan saw him stand halfway, hesitate, and then move toward the side doors as if distance itself could become evidence in his favor. Bryce Landon did not leave the hearing room all at once. He did it in stages, the way men like him retreated from liability while still trying to look composed. First, he stopped sitting behind Nicole, then he moved to the side wall and took a call he did not need to answer. By the time the panel chair announced the renewal suspension, Bryce was already in the hallway with Courtline's outside counsel, lowering his voice as if distance could scrub his name from the packet. Nicole followed him before Ethan had even stood. She caught him near the elevators, where county employees, attorneys, and 2 vendor representatives could still hear enough to understand the shape of the conversation. She asked him what he was doing, and Bryce looked past her toward the hearing room like she had become another document he needed to disclaim. "I can't be seen influencing a county vendor through your disclosure problem," he said. "Nicole, this is your filing." "I didn't sign it." That sentence landed harder than anything Ethan had said because it came from the man Nicole had treated like an exit. Bryce did not mention the nights at Wexler Tower. He did not mention the rides, the dinners, or the way he had encouraged her to call Ethan irrelevant. He spoke like a consultant preserving a client file, and in less than 20 seconds, Nicole understood that he had never planned to stand inside the damage with her. His hidden problem surfaced over the next 4 days. Julia Stern found it first in public tax lien records and a professional sanctions notice attached to an old consulting dispute. Bryce owed $118,700 in unpaid federal and state taxes, had 2 former clients threatening malpractice-adjacent claims, and needed Courtline's county renewal to rebuild his credibility before another firm dropped him. Nicole had thought he wanted her because she was sharper, more ambitious, and closer to the legal world than Ethan. In reality, Bryce needed her access, her signature, and her ability to make questionable vendor coordination look routine. Nicole tried to move the damage back into procedure. She told Courtline leadership the hearing had been distorted by a marital dispute. She told the county panel her disclosure language had been imprecise, not deceptive. She told 2 colleagues that Ethan had weaponized household accounts because he could not handle her career. For a short while, some people believed enough of that to repeat it quietly because Nicole had spent years building the kind of professional image that did not collapse from one public meeting. But records kept the pressure where Ethan's anger never could. The household charges were real. The closed docket was real. The parking entries were real. The vendor clip was real. The Caldwell Index licensing agreement was not an emotional claim. It was a signed contract with renewal rights, audit rights, and back royalty provisions Nicole had described as irrelevant before. Anyone forced her to read them carefully. Malcolm moved slowly because slow was safer. He filed a conflict notice with the county, a preservation request with Courtline, and a divorce response that separated Ethan's premarital intellectual property from the marital estate. He also challenged the $23,480 in shared funds used for after-hours vendor expenses, rides, meals, and consulting adjacent charges connected to Bryce. Julia prepared a clean financial schedule, and by the time Nicole's attorney reviewed it, the story Nicole wanted to tell had fewer places to stand. The divorce took 8 months, not 8 days. Nicole fought the classification of Caldwell Index, then gave ground when Ruth Caldwell's early assignment papers and Ethan's premarital development records made ownership difficult to attack. Ethan kept 100% control of the patent and licensing rights, recovered $31,600 in reimbursed marital funds and fee credits, and received 58% of the net house equity because Nicole's separate. Professional expenses had been run through shared accounts after the separation planning began. Nicole kept her retirement account, her car, and enough dignity on paper to call the settlement mutual, but not enough control to make that version stick in the rooms that mattered. Courtline placed her on indefinite leave after the county delayed renewal and demanded a new vendor team. The state certification board did not revoke her license, but it issued a formal reprimand and required ethics monitoring for 18 months. Bryce cooperated just far enough to protect himself, submitting a statement that Nicole had independently managed disclosure language and scheduling representations. He avoided the county hearing, followed up by resigning from the consulting packet, then resurfaced 2 months later with a smaller firm in another city. Ethan did not feel triumphant when the papers were signed. He felt the way he felt after a long emergency repair in the basement of the courthouse, when the water had finally stopped rising, but the floor still needed days to dry. People treated him differently afterward, and not all of it was comfortable. Some courthouse employees became warmer. Some avoided him because knowing the truth made their earlier assumptions embarrassing. Maribel Shaw sent him one handwritten note, thanking him not for winning, but for making sure the people her office served were seen in the record. Nicole moved into a 1-bedroom apartment above a pharmacy on Grant Avenue. On the first night after the settlement, she set her court reporter machine on a small desk facing a blank wall and opened a folder of job listings that no longer included the county vendors she used. To call by first name. Her phone did not light up with Bryce's name. The room was quiet but not peaceful, and for the first time in years there was no procedure left for her to hide inside. Nicole approached Ethan 6 weeks after the settlement, outside the courthouse employee entrance where he still arrived before sunrise. She wore a gray coat he did not recognize, and for a moment she looked less like the woman from the hearing and more like someone trying to remember which version of herself had first walked into that building, she said. I didn't think you would actually let it go that far, and Ethan looked at the revolving doors behind her before answering. You mean the divorce or the record, he asked. Nicole pressed her lips together and said she had only wanted him to understand that she felt invisible too. That standing beside lawyers and judges every day made it hard to come home to a life that never seemed to move. Ethan listened the way he had always listened, but this time he did not repair the gap for her. You confuse silence with weakness because you never respected what I was listening to, he said. A marriage does not fall apart when someone is quiet. It falls apart when one person decides quiet. People do not matter. Nicole looked down at the courthouse steps, as if procedure might still offer her a cleaner answer, but none came. She said his name once, softly, and Ethan nodded without stepping closer. They never spoke again. 3 months later, Ethan signed the first formal documents for the Caldwell Access Transcript Fund. It was not a charity with glossy promises or a launch event built for photographs. It was a practical program with Maribel Shaw's legal aid office, 2 county clerks, and a simple purpose: paying transcript and certified record fees for people who could not protect themselves without paperwork. The first approved request came from a woman named Denise Harper, a tenant fighting an illegal lockout after her landlord changed the locks while her children were at school. Her hearing transcript cost more than she had in her checking account, and without it, her appeal would have been a story no one could verify. Ethan did not meet her in a dramatic hallway or ask for thanks. He only received the confirmation email showing the transcript had been released, then printed the receipt and filed it in a folder labeled with his mother's name. His life did not become perfect after that. The house on Maple Ridge felt too large for one person at first, and some mornings he still made coffee in the silver-lidded mug before remembering Nicole was gone. He repainted the kitchen, replaced the old dishwasher he had fixed too many times, and moved Ruth Caldwell's framed courthouse badge from a hallway drawer to the shelf beside his work boots. At the courthouse, people still called Ethan when elevators stuck, when hearing room microphones died, and when storms pushed water through the old basement windows. The difference was not that they suddenly treated him like a rich man or a hero. The difference was smaller and more permanent. When Ethan entered a room, people made space for the quiet man who had kept the building running long before anyone understood what else he had been holding together. Nicole had believed the record belonged to whoever sounded most professional while speaking into it. Bryce had believed the record could be managed until liability arrived. Ethan's mother had understood something both of them missed. Records matter because they remember what powerful people hope will be too expensive, too quiet, or too inconvenient to prove. In the end, Ethan did not win because he shouted louder. He won because he kept copies, respected patterns, and refused to confuse being underestimated with being powerless. The same patience that made him good at fixing broken courthouse systems became the patience that saved his name, his mother's work, and the people who needed the doors opened after everyone else had gone home. If this story stayed with you, hit like, share it with someone who understands how quiet betrayal actually works, and subscribe for more stories like this one. Was Ethan right to stay silent until the hearing? Or should he have confronted Nicole earlier when the invoice first appeared? Did Nicole's fatal line hurt more because it insulted Ethan's job, or because it proved she never understood his mother's legacy? What do you think mattered most in the end? The patent, the proof, or the transcript fund Ethan built afterward?